Tom Clancy sells to UbiSoft. AOL gets sued by its volunteers. And Uwe Boll sets his sights on games. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine. I'm your host, Carl, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Peter. Say hi, Peter.
Hi.
Hey, okay. So, here we are. Today we're going to be going back in time 20 years to November of 2000. Looking at the biggest stories in and around the video game industry. As always, we'll be mostly using magazine cover dates, and those are, of course, always a bit behind the actual events. But it gives us a system to go by. So, Peter, before we get started, any deep insights into the human psyche to share with us this evening?
Deep insights. Oh man, you don't want to get me started. I had a salary negotiation this week, and oh lordy.
Did you play three-dimensional chess against them?
No, it rather was a take it or leave it approach by me, and they left it, and well, they are lost.
There you go. Perfect. So, dear listeners, you've heard the master strategist, Peter, reveal to you the secrets of his doings and comings and goings. So, yes.
It's afterwards, I was like, oh shit. I've played it cool.
Awesome.
So, let's leave those worldly topics behind of us and dive right into the more important history of video games.
Well, before we do that, we need to take care of two bits of business. First off, remember, you can follow us on Twitter at VideoGameNewsR2, on Instagram, and you can also send us an email at videogamenewsroomtimemachine@gmail.com. And as always, we also have a Patreon that you can also support us on. As for as low as $1, you can get access to a bunch of interviews that have not hit the feed yet and may not hit the feed for several months to come. So be one of the cool kids and listen to it early. RSS feed is available, so you don't have to just watch it or listen to it on the Patreon webpage.
Never know when this news or the interviews and the news shared therein will be outdated.
This is true, too. I mean, granted, it's usually old history, but you never know. So, that being said, let's check in with Ethan to find out what we got wrong in this week's Department of Corrections. So, Ethan, welcome back. Tell me, what did we get wrong in October of 2000?
Well, actually, in this, I don't actually have corrections. And actually, I have to correct myself on something that I said.
Oh, no.
And we'll get that one out of the way. And then
who watches The Watchmen?
Well, I guess. But then we'll get into a little Punch-Out, which I think will be entertaining for the viewers.
Okay.
For the listeners, I guess.
Yeah.
So when I was correcting Carl about Steam, I made a faux pas. And I assumed that Steam came out in 2004 with the release of Half-Life 2, which was not true. It came out a year earlier as, not just the beta phase went back, to 2002, but Steam was released in 2003. And mea culpa.
Terrible. I don't know how you live with yourself, sir.
Yeah, that's the deepest Valve fan that I am. You would expect me to know this inside and out, but apparently it doesn't mean anything. The other part of the 2000 conversation is you talking about the reveal of the GameCube. And basically, you made you hurt me deeply, but with your little comments, and then you decided to extrapolate your own hatred into the historical record, which I found deplorable.
Oh no! Absolutely. What? How did I offend thee?
Oh, you offend the truth, Carl.
Okay.
But you basically were saying that one of the reasons the GameCube did not hit it off with journalists is they didn't know how to react to the controller. And I think that this displays a certain bias on it's not just you not liking the controller, it's more the part of seeing an inevitability. That ahead of you is the PlayStation and the Xbox controller, and those are the true controllers, and there is no deviation from such. And I think it's ironic because in this episode you also talk about how in the era of the late NES, it was going up against the Genesis. When the Genesis was getting its feet off the ground, that it was competing with the NES. It wasn't competing with the SNES.
Yes.
And so, that's a part of the history you want people to understand. That it's not this inevitability, and Genesis didn't just pop out of nowhere. It was going up against weaker competition in the beginning. And it had a lot of potential to get further ahead than it did. And of course, console wars and all that. So I just think it's kind of an ironic thing to see ahead of you the perfect controller as your mind's eye, and to assume that people at the time would have considered it particularly odd, especially when the DualShock was not really that popular of a controller. There's that famous Alien game review where they're like, the DualShock is the worst thing to ever happen to first-person shooters. So it was not... So I just wanted to make the point that it's not inevitable, and I don't think you should project your dislike of the fabulous purple kidney shape onto the people at the time.
Now, my comment was, in fact, based off of several comments I read in magazines of the time. I believe both Next Generation magazine and I don't want to say it was Game Pro. It was another magazine were both extremely skeptical about the controller. There were comments about how they weren't sure how the controller was really going to interact. Now, some of this also had to do with the fact that it did have those pressure-sensitive shoulder buttons, and I can't remember if it was only the shoulder buttons that were pressure-sensitive on the GameCube controller.
It was just those.
Whether or not that was actually going to be something functional, and I believe that they were also a bit worried about the size factor, that it felt a bit smallish. Now, obviously, I have gone on the record several times saying that I am not a fan of that controller. I mean, granted, it's probably not the worst controller of all time. That still goes to, I want to guess, either the 7800 controller or maybe even the 5200 controller were both kind of terrible. But I did not mean to. I should have grabbed the sources for those comments and put them in the show notes to show that it wasn't just my personal bias, but that I was truly trying to reflect the what can we call it? The attitude that seemed to be in the air about that weird, ambivalent hunk of plastic that could not quite figure out what it was supposed to be, especially since it still had the Z target button or whatever it was, but now on the side as opposed to underneath like a proper trigger button as it was on the N64. I mean, it was just odd. An odd duck controller.
Yeah, and I go to this all in jest.
I know. It's so do I.
Just making it clear here, but I think this is an interesting thing to talk about as a historiological debate to understand where our biases intersect with the available resources at the time, and to clearly display where the line is.
Of course. No, and I definitely agree with you. And it's one of the interesting parts of the history of this, as well as the approach I'm trying to take with it, because and I'm really looking forward to when this comes about. There's a ton of magazines that reviewed Sid Meier's Pirates extremely poorly because they couldn't get it. They didn't understand the idea of an open-ended game with no clear goals except for, ending your career on a high note. And the same magazines just a few months later are talking about how this is, this new classic that is going to take the world by storm. And it's that idea of attitudes changing over time and people learning from the lessons of the past, and the fact that you're still holding on to the GameCube controller and not learning those lessons is just kind of sad. So sad.
Oh, boy.
Sorry, that was a long.
I gotta get you in Smash one day, and then it's all gonna be it's gonna be over.
Do not get me started on Smash. Do not get me started on that.
Oh, we're not. Okay, we're moving on. Back to the episode.
I'm amazed about the things I learn at midnight.
Oh, it is midnight. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I don't know what to say to that, but hopefully for those people out there who are listening to this podcast at midnight, they can say the same thing. So, with no further ado, let's turn on the time machine, head back 20 years to November of 2000.
As an industry, video gaming is bigger than Hollywood.
Y2K electronic launch in history.
Welcome to November of 2000. Peter, what's our first story?
GameCube demos shown at Space World.
Nintendo's show, Space World in Tokyo, has shown off the first demos of the new hardware. The big launch titles teased are Luigi's Mansion, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2, a brief glimpse of a 3D Metroid, and an awesome-looking Zelda game using a look reminiscent of the N64 games, but with much higher poly counts. This wouldn't come to be, though, as the system Zelda games would go for a cel-shaded look instead.
That was Wind Waker, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, there was a couple other. There were some other games too. Minish Cap, I think, or was that a Game Boy Advance? I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, Minish Cap is Game Boy Advance.
Yeah, well, So they're showing off the first demos of the GameCube. They also revealed the shape of it and stuff, and the controllers, but there's really nothing playable yet to be seen. And a lot of this stuff, nobody was sure, is it gameplay footage? Is it pre-rendered? Obviously, it was all supposed to be done with the actual hardware, but it's one thing to be making something look really, really good when there's no interactivity necessary. Yeah. And another one when you actually have to make it interactive. So, yeah, I mean, it was a good hype promoter, but again, it also strengthened the question, where's Mario? And this was going to be one of the GameCube's big weaknesses, was where's Mario? And, it's still a system that has some really good games. Yes, Ethan, I still think the controller blew, but other than that, it wasn't going to be hitting it out of the park like some of Nintendo's previous efforts had.
Yeah. Talking about hits out of the park, Sega keeps pinning its hopes on SegaNet.
In the ongoing struggle for relevance in the face of the PS2 launch and Xbox and GameCube announcements, Sega keeps pushing on with SegaNet. We've already discussed their sign up for 18 months and get a free Dreamcast promotion. Well, now, after about half of the country's ISPs weren't able to connect users to the SegaNet due to compatibility problems, Sega is handing out 50 free hours of SegaNet to anyone who buys a Dreamcast game with online play. Will this help them transition to a whole new paradigm? No, but it did give us an awesome commercial. And there's a link to that commercial in the show notes, as there are links to all the sources in the show notes. And if you haven't seen this, it really is a pretty cool commercial. You want to go and check this out real quick? Because it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, let's have a look.
Yep.
It's evening in America. And across this great land, young men and women are coming together through the power of the internet with one common goal: to whoop each other's booties. Sega Dreamcast games are now online, unleashing the ultimate horror, your fellow Americans. Jack into SegaNet through your Dreamcast console and join your countrymen in the virtual arena. Play NFL 2K1 and cream for meatheads you've never even met. Play NBA 2K1 and school some farm boy without suffering the scent of livestock. Or play Quake 3 and waste some Jersey punk from the sanctity of your own home. And so, America, SegaNet is born. And suddenly we are one proud nation, indivisible, united in the pursuit of whoopin' booty.
Oh, Lord.
I have to admit, that was probably the best thing to come out of that era of Sega, was that one ad.
I mean, I don't really get the fish.
Oh, the fish was a game called Seaman.
Yeah.
And it was this bizarre game where you started off basically with this tiny little tadpole thing, and you evolved it, and it had a face. And you could talk to it, and then later on it could actually, if you I don't want to call it a Tamagotchi, but because the controller also had a microphone built into it, you talked with it. It could recognize words and commands, and basically you dealt with your back talking fish until it evolved into a different form. It was weird.
Yeah, I think the entire thing was weird.
Yeah, the whole thing was weird, but...
I have a response to that ad. I really don't.
It was one of those things where at the time it was the next evolution of the attitude. And the fact that you could play online against other people was still novel, especially for console gamers just still hadn't experienced that.
No, this is definitely a cool thing, but if handing out 50 free hours of SegaNet to anyone who buys a game with online play, I mean, it's a nice thing, but I think this really shows how desperate they were.
Oh yeah, no, they are flailing. They're trying to transition to an online strategy. And I think internally they already knew the Dreamcast was over, and they were hoping that somehow this SegaNet thing was going to give them a platform to build online-only games off of that they then could have people play on other hardware. And
They were just a couple of years too early.
They're a couple of years too early. They don't have the general platform. They needed a console with a hard drive in it. And this is also why the Xbox Arcade becomes the platform that it is, because the Xbox has a hard drive in it.
Exactly.
And that's what was missing. And because there's no place to store what you've downloaded on a Dreamcast. You're stuck with what was on the original disc you purchased. And yeah, it's not going to work.
No.
But at least they're trying.
That didn't work. The Wonder Swan Color was announced.
We just talked a few months ago about how SNK cut their losses and ran from the US market, abandoning the Neo Geo Pocket line. Now, Bandai has shown off the color variant of Gunpei Yokoi's One Battery Wonder, the Wonder Swan Color. Will the Game Boy Color competitor make it to the US? Only time will tell. Screw it. Who am I kidding? No, it won't. Yeah, so the Wonder Swan stays in Japan. I may have also gotten a release in Korea, but as far as I know, I think it only makes it to Japan. And impressive. I mean, runs for forever on just one battery. It's great. But yeah, and the color variant is essentially trying to compete with the Game Boy Color at the same time that Nintendo's already showing off the Game Boy Advance. And it's like, what's the point?
Exactly.
Yeah. Especially since you're not going to attract the big game franchises to this niche product.
Talking about big game franchises coming to a not so niche product, and I know this is a topic that is just for you.
Of course. That's why it's here.
Dragon's Lair is coming to the Game Boy Color.
Not our normal type of headline, but too cool to ignore. Capcom is porting the original Laserdisc Dragon's Lair arcade game to the Game Boy Color. While a Dragon's Lair branded game had been released on the original Game Boy, this will be the first conversion of the original machine. And yeah, this was just one of those things that when it came out, when it was announced, I was just like, say that again? And I didn't quite understand or know what they meant by it. But yeah, I mean, individual still shots look okay. When it's moving, it's passable at best. Would I really want to play it? Probably not, but it gives me the warm fuzzies to know that there's a Game Boy cartridge that plays the original Laserdisc Dragon's Lair. And that was just kind of cool.
Legends never die.
No, they don't, especially when they're animated by Don Bluth.
Okay, talking about Legends not dying. Infogrames announces joint venture with Hudson.
Yes, the French behemoth that has been buying up companies for the last 2 years has now penned a deal with Japanese developer Hudson Soft. The 70-30 split venture is set to develop next-gen titles as well as localize Infogram titles for Asian markets. According to Moby Games, only 2 titles are associated with the company: Wacky Races for Windows and PSX, and Snoopy Tennis on the Game Boy Color. Seeing as Hudson had just recently lost its major source of financing when its bank went bust, and an IPO will be coming in December, the joint venture no doubt helped improve its chances of a successful flotation. So, a little bit to unpack here.
Yeah.
But, so Infogram is still riding high on the .com bubble, in France, or the entertainment bubble in France. But just like the dot-com bubble in the States, which is beginning to show its first fractures at this point in time, Infogrames is also about to start feeling its first fractures. And Hudson Soft, they were still a privately held company at this point, even though they'd been in the business for forever. And they were getting most of their financing through a single bank in Japan. So they had open lines of credit with the bank. When they needed money, they could get it. And that bank has gone belly up. And so they were suddenly in a position where they desperately needed new financing. And I couldn't find anything concrete on this, but given the timing of the whole issue, it's just a little too suspect that it's not somehow related. That they were taking this money from the French. They would localize some games for the Asian market. And the fact that Infogrames is about to hit the skids, because they've been overextending themselves, especially in the U.S., is just shown in which games actually get this Infogrames Hudson branding slapped on them. And the fact that it's Wacky Races for Windows and PSX, which also are not the best versions of that game, and that the some Game Boy Color game with the Snoopy license, it's destined to fail, but it probably helped Hudson at least when it came to the valuation and the IPO a little bit.
Yeah, sure, of course. I mean, Infogrames still is a behemoth, so.
No, Infogrames is dead, pretty much. Infogrames today is Atari.
No, not today. I mean, back in 2000.
Oh, back in 2000, they're still huge.
Yeah.
But the groundwork has already been laid for them to die. They've already bitten off more than they could chew, and instead of trying to eat the elephant one bite at a time, they've been trying to swallow it whole, and it's about to choke them to death.
This is weirdly graphical. Jesus.
Well, don't you know the old phrase? The old joke is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah, but
yeah.
Not expecting that. Let me just.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Ubisoft, a French company, as we know, buys Red Storm.
Exactly. Tom Clancy's game development studio Red Storm, makers of titles such as Rainbow Six, has been acquired by Ubisoft. Ubisoft said that this acquisition was an important step to becoming, quote, one of the world's top 5 publishers, end quote. They weren't wrong. Together with the development studio, Ubisoft also gets an exclusive long-term license and endorsement agreement from Clancy.
Huh.
Yeah, and at this time, it really was an important license to have. I mean, it still is, because it gave them a foothold in this whole tactical shooter market, which was getting bigger and bigger. And, I mean, as soon as online play really takes off, it becomes even more important. And the Rainbow Six franchise was huge.
Yeah.
So this was an important purchase for Ubisoft. It's a good development studio. It makes sense. It fills some holes in their own lineup. And unlike the purchases made by Infogrames, Ubisoft's purchases are really adding to their long-term value.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I have nothing to add to that. So let's just move on. Sorry. AOL volunteers want to get paid. Those suckers.
AOL forum volunteers have filed a lawsuit against the internet giant for minimum wage payment as employees. Currently, they are at most getting rebates on services in exchange for their work. The work hours and schedules being enforced, though, are, according to the volunteers, beyond the scope of volunteer work. Similar arrangements are also popular in MMOs, and the outcome of the case could drastically change the current economic structures of such games forever.
Two questions. First of all, how were those volunteer hours enforced?
Well, they told you you're going to be volunteering from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you didn't show up, well, you lost your editor privileges. So now you wouldn't be a volunteer who could remove messages and stuff. And the rebates would also fall away.
Yeah, still I don't see a point in doing this work for AOL.
Well, people didn't see it as doing the work for AOL. They were doing the work for the communities. Now, you have to remember the structure of AOL, especially in these early days, or in the earlier days, was that you would have different online communities. So if you had an AOL subscription, you could go and post in any number of different communities. Now, you probably weren't posting in all the communities because there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, but you would hang out in ones that had things of interest to you. Now, let's say you're posting in a forum about, I don't know, people who like to fix classic cars. And somebody comes into that forum and starts posting, about how they're trying to sell their kittens. Well, you could now, in theory, send a request to the official AOL staffers to say, hey, this guy is doing something he's not supposed to. Can you please remove the messages? But it might take forever. And you hang out in these forums all day long, talking to other people. They're your friends. You're chatting with them and doing other stuff. This is basically like a home away from home, and you don't want people invading your home. And so a lot of people were volunteering to be moderators, to basically police these forums and make sure that only people who should be on the forum are on the forum. Or if somebody came into the forum that wasn't supposed to be there, or somebody who was new and needed help, these people would offer their help. And so that's why these volunteers were doing this volunteer stuff. And the fact that then they got a reduction on their charges was great, because a lot of these were still pay as you go. They were pay by the hour, or you only had so many free hours and then you had to pay for the additional hours. So the more hours they had, the more time they could spend in there, and that's what they wanted to do anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. And
be like the moderator, you need to put in more hours, and then you get a rebate from AOL for basically just the hours that you've spent, or?
No, I mean, I don't think there was probably a couple of variations, but from what I understand is, if you did all the hours that you were scheduled to do, you would get a certain amount of rebate. If you did less hours, you'd get less of a rebate.
Okay.
Yeah. So in lieu of paying you, they were giving you AOL services. So it was an exchange of services.
Which sounds nice. However, those scumbags actually wanted to get paid for the work they did.
Well, this is the problem. I mean, you're in the middle of the dot-com boom. AOL is now one of the biggest companies in the world. They're making tons and tons of cash, and you're actually the one maintaining their system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they are like, let's pay us for this. We're doing these unbelievably long hours sometimes. Yeah. At least give us something for it. And the problem is that the MMO market, which is just now really taking off, Ultima Online, Meridian 59, EverQuest is on the way, and so forth. These games are going to be building off of the same model. where it's players getting a discount on their monthly charges or whatever are supposed to also do the monitoring of good and bad behavior, fixing technical problems, and so forth.
Uh-huh.
And these games, which are extremely expensive to develop, remember, if you're building an entire world, you've got to have artists and all this stuff. AOL is pretty much, once you have the architecture, it's just text. But these games are extremely expensive to develop. And if you now have to also budget in not just the development costs, but maintenance costs with hundreds and hundreds of staff, you're going to be running into a problem that it doesn't make financial sense.
Exactly.
This is also in the days of subscription services or even hourly rates for the games. And they haven't figured out the unbelievably profitable free-to-play model yet. And it just seems weird to say the unbelievably profitable free-to-play mode. But
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is where a lot of these, this is where the concern comes in, is if these guys win, what's going to happen to a lot of these games? And already at the same time, and this came up in the articles, a lot of the games were already starting to try to figure out alternatives to having volunteers be the ones running the show.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
It does. You know what also makes sense?
What?
Sierra suing Tolkien and Tolkien suing back.
We talked back in June about how it looked like Sierra's parent company, Havas, another French company riding the stock boom, might lose their license to make games based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth. Well, apparently Sierra cobbled something together and delivered it to the estate to satisfy their contract and hold on to the license, but the estate has rejected it. This triggered suits and countersuits to cancel the rights, according to Computer Gaming World. And this all happening as hype is building for the release of the first movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy by Peter Jackson in December of 2001. So, this is very similar to what happened to the movie rights to the Lord of the Rings. Have you ever heard that story?
No. Will it take 2 hours?
No. I'll try to keep it brief. There was a movie producer called Saul Sense. And he had purchased the rights to Tolkien's Middle-earth books, so The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, sometime back, I think, in the 60s. And he could keep those rights. He had the rights for a while, but he had to have gotten a film produced and shown by a certain date. And so at some point in the 70s, when the rights were about to expire, he commissioned an Eastern European animation studio to produce just the bare minimum. I think like officially a movie is a movie if it's like 30 or 40 minutes long. So he produced this super, super brief version of The Hobbit.
Yeah.
Mostly with just still images and some voiceover. And then he had it shown in a movie theater in New York and had the viewers sign these statements saying that they saw a motion picture of The Hobbit and that they paid money, even though allegedly he was, handing them the money so they could go hand it to the teller. So they weren't actually paying any money to see it, but it was officially they were handing in money. And because he could get these signatures, the film rights stayed with him. And he was then the one who licensed the rights out to New Line so they could make the Peter Jackson movies. So this guy still managed to make money off the Peter Jackson versions. That's a famous story about the movie rights. And apparently Sierra tried to do the same thing here, where they cobbled something together off of this massive project that's been blowing up on them. And unfortunately, the Tolkien estate said, no, we're not playing that game. And now the suits are going back and forth. Havas / Sierra will release a couple of Tolkien-based games, but they will not be the games based on the movies. So at some point they must have settled, and they'll still release a book-based Hobbit game and a couple other things, but Electronic Arts will pick up the rights based on the movie and actually get a game out for the Two Towers. And yes, that will be their first title. Fellowship of the Rings doesn't get an official movie tie-in.
No.
But yeah, after that, EA's got it for a long time. I'm not sure who has the license right now, but somebody else has the license. But yeah, it's one of those things where Sierra is part of their collapse. And if you listen to our interview with Ken Williams, you'll find out a lot more about that collapse and read his book. Just wasn't going to be able to do anything meaningful with that license, sadly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this .com bubble leads us basically to our next topic. Pogo.com to be bought by Excite at Home.
The .com boom hasn't quite burst yet. Pogo.com, a Java-based game site that used to be Total Entertainment Network, a multiplayer matching service, is up for sale with web portal Excite at Home looking to buy them for $40 million. The .com bubble burst will lead to the deal collapsing, and in 2001, Electronic Arts will buy Pogo and keep it running as a casual game hub to this very day. Yeah. So a little bit of background here. Total Entertainment Network was one of several multiplayer matching services. The first multiplayer games like Doom and Quake and Duke Nukem, while they had LAN-based network code built into the games, they didn't have their own independent matchmaking services. So unless you had the other person's IP address, you could not try to log on and connect with them. And so there was a bunch of these companies that popped up that were trying to do this. But as soon as the makers of the games started to adapt and adjust and add this kind of matchmaking service to their games, the function of these middlemen was gone. And 10 was one of the few that successfully pivoted and changed into one of these online Java-based game portals where you could play small little casual games. And this was going to be purchased by Excite. Excite was kind of like an AOL-ish type of thing with search engines and whatnot back in the day. But they were not going to be long for this world in the light of Google taking over everything. And Electronic Arts saw the value of them, picked it up, and like I said, they're still running the site to this day. It's still a cash cow for EA. Yeah. I mean, for EA, it's perfect. It fills a certain niche, and if any of the games hits big, they can always try to resell it on other platforms. So it's a quick and easy way of testing out new ideas, and if something hits, perfect. If it doesn't, you're not really out that much in development costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just move on to the next to last topic of today. Square isn't done with Hollywood. Hollywood. What did I say?
Hollywood. You said it like Elvis would have said it. Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. It's 22:01 a.m. and
Okay. Even before their first movie, Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, hits theaters, Square announces that it will produce 3 more CGI movies with Columbia Pictures.
Wow.
Yeah. Have you ever seen Final Fantasy The Spirits Within?
I think so.
Yeah?
Wait, let me just... And I'm Googling some pictures to see whether or not I saw this. Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. And what did you think of the movie?
I thought it was pretty weird.
Yeah. Well, you weren't alone, and the movie was a huge flop. And guess what happened to the other 3 CGI movies they wanted to make with Columbia Pictures?
They weren't wildly successful or not even made.
They were not even made. Excellent. Yes, so Square is basically counting their chickens before they're hatched. And unfortunately, everybody went in there hoping to see either the characters from Final Fantasy VII, maybe the characters from Final Fantasy VI. They wanted at least to see one chocobo, and what they got was this dire, horrible... Can't even remember what the plot was when I walked out of the movie theater, and I didn't care anymore because it was bad. And speaking of other Hollywood disasters...
Yes, House of Dead is coming to theaters.
Mindfire Entertainment has purchased the rights to adapt the dark, Lovecraft meets sci-fi light gun shooter House of the Dead into a teenager-oriented popcorn flick. And suddenly the world will know the name of Uwe Boll. Does this name strike fear into your gamer's heart?
It doesn't strike fear into my gamer's heart. However, it strikes a sense of, oh Lord, into my gamer's brain.
Aha, that is a very good reaction, a very healthy reaction. So, for those uninitiated, Uwe Boll, or Dr. Uwe Boll, because in Germany, every Tom, Dick, and Harry has been handed a piece of paper with a doctorate on it. He is a movie director / amateur boxer / numbnuts who figured out the secret to accessing German government subsidies for making movies and has made a career out of mindless, horribly written schlock. And how to keep doing that schlock when nobody ever goes to see the movies? Well, you get yourself a license to throw on it. How do you get a license that doesn't cost too much but still has name recognition? You get a video game license. And that's what he did for a variety of terrible movies, and one that was actually pretty good that I enjoy watching, which is Postal. But all the other ones are absolutely intolerably bad, and House of the Dead is the first and arguably one of the worst, even though it does have a bit of a cult classic status today as a home video release. But yeah, it's more than pretty dire. It's extremely dire. It's a terrible movie. It won't come out for a few more years, and we'll probably talk about it again when it does, because I have personal memories from my time working in the movie industry. I was actually involved with this movie at one point. So I've got some anecdotes to tell, but we will get to those when the time is right.
Speaking of the time is right.
It is late. We have covered this jump through time, and I think it is time for us to remind our listeners to leave a like, to give us a thumbs up, a 5-star review, to send us a nice message, to back us on Patreon, and to otherwise have fun.